We are about to hear from another mom who has experienced abuse of power in child welfare. Join us today on Fostering the Future.
Welcome to the Fostering the Future podcast, a show about all things child welfare, dependency, adoption, and foster care. Here are your hosts, veterans in the world of child welfare, Jack and Kat.
We believe that every human has incredible and equal value regardless of what side of the courtroom we sit on. We hope that everyone feels welcome and accepted here on Fostering the Future.
Make sure you follow us on Facebook or Instagram as Fostering the Future Podcast, or check us out on our website at fosteringthefuturepodcast.org. This is Jack, and today I am chatting with Megan from Washington, and we're going to hear about her experience with abuse of power by DCYF, which is what they call it in Washington. Thank you for joining me today, Megan.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Megan, what is your favorite drink at Starbucks?
I am definitely an iced white chocolate Americano girl, and definitely have to have the cream because I like the taste of coffee, but the Americano just straight is just a little too bitter for me.
Well, I can't wait to hear more because it sounds like your story is a little different from some of the other ones that I've heard. Can you start off by telling me a little bit about your family?
So me and my husband met in Louisiana. He was stationed there at an Air Force base there in Louisiana. And I worked at Waffle House and I worked graveyard shift. We met actually online on a dating app. Yeah. And then so later that year, we actually wound up getting engaged. He was getting discharged from the Air Force. So we wound up moving up here to Washington because that's where he's actually from. That's where he grew up at. So we got married in February of the following year. I fell pregnant with our first kid. His name's Nathaniel. He is going to be 3 next month. I fell pregnant with him about, I think, November later that year. And then he was born the next year in July. He was a baby was kind of when everything happened. And then after everything with like the state was all done and over with, we wound up getting pregnant with our now daughter. And she'll actually also be a year old next month in July. Their birthdays are 15 days apart, oddly enough.
That's really cool.
It was pretty crazy how it happened. So like I had just started working when I got pregnant with Nathaniel. And then I wound up taking off after I kind of got too pregnant to work. And then I went back to work not long after he was born. I think he was like 7 or 8 weeks old. I went back to work and then I had to stop working because there wasn't enough staff to keep the restaurant running. So then I took a hiatus from working after that. And then I went back to work in September of 22. And then I got pregnant shortly after starting working again. So it's just like, I'm just cursed. I shouldn't go back to work.
You and your husband, he is completing his term in the military. You moved to Washington. You have your son, Nathaniel, in July of, was that 2020 or 2021? Okay, so post-COVID baby. That's stressful enough as it is.
So we were kind of like at the tail end of it where people were starting to kind of loosen up with their like protocols and everything. My husband still had to wear a mask when I was in the hospital in labor with our son. They did make me take a COVID test when I was in labor. They did. Because if I had COVID, they said I was going to have to wear a mask. And I'm just like, I'm in labor. Are you serious? Whatever. And then my son got sick later that year. Well, I think he wasn't even 3 months old yet. But yeah, when he got sick, we had to wear masks. So we were in the children's hospital. We had to wear masks all out and about in the hospital. But while we were in our room, they didn't make us wear them, except for there was one nurse that she was real crazy about it. And she said that she has some kind of lung thing. And so she needs people to wear a mask. And I'm like, that's totally fine. I get that, but you're working in a PICU. The worst place for you to be working if you have some underlying health issues.
Okay, so you are part of a really fun club of families who have had medical kidnappings from DCF, or as they call it, their DCYF, due to medical issues. Obviously not really a fun club to be in.
It's the funnest.
It's the funnest. The wildest thing is that the moms that I have met who are going through this are literally like the nicest people I've ever met in my life, like way nicer than I am. And I'm like, how is anybody looking at this sweet woman and ever thinking anything? So it may not be a fun club to be in necessarily, but there's some pretty high caliber parents involved. Anyways, being part of this club, you've obviously had an experience that was pretty crappy. And I was hoping that you could share that with us.
Oh, I would say crappy is just putting it loosely.
Yeah.
I definitely equate it to my worst nightmare on steroids. It's never a fun feeling to be accused of something that you didn't do, but then to be accused of hurting your own child when you know that you didn't, it puts you into a state of shock, honestly. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, I would never hurt a single hair on my baby's head. Like, that's, yeah, it took me a while to process it. Really well off until after the case was dismissed. I was still working to process through everything that happened. Nathaniel, he was 2.5 months old. He would have been 3 months old on the 27th, but we went to the hospital on October 14th. We went like in the middle of the night. I had already went back to work. And so my husband was getting up with the baby at night. I would sleep and then wake up, I think once or twice in the night to pump because I was breastfeeding. Nathaniel had already been sick. He had been to the doctor, I think 3 or 4 days prior. He had a really, really bad cold. I mean, he couldn't be laid back without struggling to breathe. Like he would just start coughing and like gagging on his phlegm. I took him to the pediatrician with my mother-in-law and like literally he acted totally normal. I'm just like, are you kidding me? You were just coughing in the car on the way here and now you're normal.
Classic kid trick. Like my kid's doing the weirdest thing. Like you've got to squeeze him in and see him right away. Something is wrong. And then you get there and the kid's like, I swear it was happening 10 minutes ago.
It makes you feel like you're crazy. I told him what was going on. You know, the doctor, he looked over him and everything. He said, yeah, he just seems like he has some bronchiolitis. And so he sent me home with like 5 or 6 pieces of paperwork and told me what to do. Like if he got worse, you know, when to call 911. 3 or 4 days later, he got really, really bad in the night again. My husband was waking up with him and tried to wipe his mouth out with some tissue. The tissue broke off. So he was like trying to get the tissue out of his mouth. And then whenever he got the tissue out of his mouth, he said that there was like this tiny little bitty speck of blood on him. So then like he looked in his mouth and it wasn't bleeding. But he was like, he's really struggling to breathe. So like, I think we should call 911. So he called my mother-in-law and she literally lived at the time 5 minutes down the road. She used to be a CNA. So we were like, oh yeah, let's just get her over here real quick. And then so as soon as she got there, we all collectively were like, yeah, let's call 911. So we called 911. The paramedics show up. There was an ambulance for the fire department and like for like the actual ambulance company that works around here. They came in and they like checked him, like they checked his vitals, like all of that stuff. His oxygen was running, I think at 88. So they were like, yeah, let's go ahead and go take him in. And then so on the way there, I actually rode in the back of the ambulance with him. I was holding him on my arm, like on his belly, so that way he could breathe. And he actually started to fall asleep on the way there. His oxygen started to come up. I think it was like 92 or 93 or something while we were in the ambulance. So it wasn't like bad, but they thought he needed to be looked at. When we were in court for our fact finding, they actually called one of the paramedics from that night to testify. And he said that he was absolutely shocked at how aggressively the hospital staff treated the baby because he wasn't in respiratory failure. He needed to be like, he needed help, but like he wasn't in respiratory failure. And like, they just like swarmed around him and just like started going ham on him. There were so many people in the room. They asked me to step out. And then so I stepped out and I sat in a chair that literally like I still had perfect view of everything going on around him. And I heard the doctor come into the room and he said, what's going on? Why is he not intubated yet? A couple of minutes later, I'm walking back to go talk to my husband and my mother-in-law because they came with us. The doctor comes back and then he said, I don't really know what was going on, but the intubation, we were having a really hard time getting him intubated, but he's intubated now and he's stable. And then he went on to tell us about how he's going to transfer us to the children's hospital because they're such a low-level trauma center that they're not equipped to deal with babies with respiratory issues.
Did the oxygen go like super low that would require them to intubate? Or was it still the high 80s?
Not to my knowledge. I never knew of it dropping below 80. The lowest I saw it was at 88.
The reason I ask is because I have a little guy and he has some chronic breathing issues. So we have to go to the hospital a lot. Like if he gets a cold, like we're stuck in the hospital for a week and his oxygen goes way below 80 and the most they've done is like they put the thing, like the oxygen little tubes under here and it helps like add some oxygen. And he's gotten like way below mid 80s, like way below. So I'm just curious. I wonder if it's because they weren't a children's hospital, so they were just more worried.
After we've all talked about it, that's kind of like what we assumed, because I've had other people tell me that it's weird that they would have intubated him. There was somebody in the hospital, like in the emergency room, but I remember them making some kind of comment about like questioning the intubation, like if they really needed to.
They need to transfer you to the children's hospital. And then what?
So we wait there for 2 or 3 hours. We're waiting for the helicopter to come get us because we live in such a rural area. It was like a 2 or 3 hour drive at the time to the hospital versus like a 30, 45 minute flight. I asked them if anybody was going to be able to go with them. And they said that they had to check with the pilot because of the weight limit. They were asking me like how tall I was, like how much I weighed. And then they had to check like all of that stuff to make sure that there was even a seat available. And then that's
a fun thing to be asked right after giving birth.
Yeah, I know, like right?
3 months away. And some guy is asking me about my weight. Like, dude, what do you weigh?
I know, right? I do feel like I was fortunate to be able to ride in the helicopter with them, but I feel like this is kind of when things start to get a little fishy. Mid-flight, I remember hearing one of the flight nurses or whatever in the back, I guess he's a paramedic, asked to take me off of the intercom. So it went silent for a few minutes, and then the pilot comes back on, says my name and asks if I can hear him again. And I'm like, yeah, I can hear you. And then he tells me that we're getting ready to land. And then immediately, as soon as I step off that helicopter on the top of the hospital, I'm met with a social worker. I thought they just worked for the hospital. I thought they were just there to like make sure I was okay. I didn't realize that they were already starting to try to build a case against me. I met with a social worker, and then there's like 5 or 6 people swarming around Nathaniel doing CPR on him. And I'm just like so confused. She's trying to get me to like not see what's going on, trying to walk me towards the door and talking
CPR?
to me to keep me distracted. Yeah. Yeah, no, he cardiac arrested in the helicopter, but I didn't find that out until like hours later. Yeah, he coded. He had like 10 to 20 minutes of CPR. So we get to the room and I'm just sitting in a room by myself. There's no baby in the room with me yet. I'm just sitting in an empty hospital room in a children's hospital. My anxiety is at an all-time high. I'm just like, what is going on? What's about to happen? I don't know what's going on. I sit there for hours. I'm hungry. I'm in my clothes that I slept in. I haven't brushed my hair. Probably needed to take a shower. I was sweating from all the anxiety, the adrenaline, all of it. I think at like 10:30ish was when they finally brought Nathaniel back in the morning, and we went to the ER in the middle of the night. So we're at like 10:30 now. We're finally getting him into the room, and then there's like all these cords attached to him. There's a tube down his throat. There's all these machines that he's hooked up to. He was fine, and now he's not. Like, I'm confused. I want to say it was the same day. There was an ear, nose, throat doctor, an ENT. He came in with pictures that they had from sending a scope down his throat to show me a cut that was in the very back of his throat. Like, I'm talking like down here.
So they cut him while they were intubating him.
Yes. They will not admit that. They accused my husband of doing it when he dug the tissue out of his mouth.
Oh, shut up. You can't put your finger down that far.
Even though they said it was all the way down here.
And as soon as, like, first of all, the intubation, I'm like, if they weren't a children's hospital, do they know how to intubate a 3-month-old? Suddenly he needs CPR. That happens a lot when you intubate. If it's not done properly, you cause injury. Yes. And so that's like the immediate thing that I've been sitting here thinking, she's going to tell me that he's got some type of injury. So they're having social workers come and talk to you after they put a tube down a throat of a baby whose oxygen was only down to 88. Mm-hmm. What happens next? This is a wild ride.
So I have a nurse, the first nurse that he had, told me that they were going to have their scan team come talk to me. It was just a protocol that they go through whenever they have kids come in with weird injuries. And I'm just like, first of all, what weird injuries are you talking about? He wasn't injured before we brought him to the hospital. I didn't try to talk about it with her. I was just like, okay, whatever. I think it wound up being the next day when they came to talk to me. I think it stands for like the Safe Child Abuse and Neglect. I don't know. They're child abuse pediatricians. That's all I know.
Right.
And then they tell me when they come to talk to me, you know, like they ask me a bunch of questions about like where Nathaniel sleeps. Is he breastfed? Like, who's his main caretaker? What does his daily life look like? You know, just normal questions, trying to figure out who he is, what our family is like, maybe trying to get some backstory to whatever, I guess. And then they tell me they're going to like run a full skeletal x-ray, a full body x-ray. I literally told them, I'm like, you know, like I get, you just got a job to do. Like, if that's what you need to do, then like whatever, like you can do whatever. But I was naive and I didn't realize that I had the ability to tell them no, that they weren't going to do that to my baby. Hindsight's 2020. Probably won't ever be in that situation again because of the knowledge I have now, but people have been struck by lightning twice. You never know. I'm sure you've probably already guessed it. They found fractures.
Mm-hmm.
They found rib fractures on a baby that they performed CPR on, and then proceeded to tell me that the CPR had nothing to do with it and that they were at least 30 days old. I did wind up going and getting the x-rays from the outside hospital that we went to based off of like what the expert radiologist pointed out in court, what he was looking for. I didn't see that on the fractures from the other hospital, on the ribs, on the x-rays from the other hospital. I don't really think those fractures were ever really there. There were no fractures on him before he got there.
Okay, so he did have fractures, but he didn't have them before the CPR in the helicopter and getting to the children's hospital.
Correct. So we got the full body x-ray done. You know, they told us that he had the rib fractures. They were going to do like either an MRI. After the MRI, they said they found like some swelling in like the back, like cervical tissue in his neck. Well, the radiologist actually that did his MRI came and talked to me and my mother-in-law. And she told me that he could have very well done that to himself, because a baby at 2.5 months old does not have very good head control, and their head's just like falling all over the place. She said, even as an adult, you do it to yourself pretty frequently. Like anytime that you've ever felt like you've pulled your neck muscle, just doing like, I literally did it to myself the other day.
Yeah.
Just trying to get off of my bed. It's just like, and then, so she was like, yeah, he really very easily could have done it to himself. The child abuse pediatrician won't even like admit that the radiologist said that.
So it's really just like a pulled muscle or just swelling? What exactly is on the back?
I was told that it was swelling, but they were like, yeah, like your husband probably did it. I think the next day my husband was actually able to come up to the hospital because he was also sick too. And they said he had to have a negative COVID test before he could come up there. So then my husband comes up there, the child abuse pediatricians come back, and then they talk to him and they tell him all of everything that was going on. They asked him about the rib fractures, if there was anything that he thought that could have caused that. And he was like, no, there's nothing that either of us could have ever thought of that would have caused it. I mean, we did go on a road trip and we went on like a really extremely bumpy car ride. That's the only way that he was ever jarred or jolted around, was like going on a road with a bunch of potholes. And they said, no, that wouldn't have done it. That doesn't like give enough force for anything to do that. And then we're just like, well, yeah, then like, we don't know. So they're like, well, since you can't give us the reason why the injuries happened, then we have to make the report to CPS. As soon as when that happened, my whole entire like nervous system just went into a panic. He almost died, and you're going to tell me that you're going to report me to CPS. I don't really understand how that makes any sense at this point. I really felt like I was being targeted and harassed. So much so to the point that I actually told the scam team not to come back to the room. I did not want to talk to them anymore. I told them, I said, at this point, you keep coming back and asking me for new things, asking me to do more things to my son. Like, I feel like you're harassing me at this point, and I don't want to talk to you anymore. And they even put it in the notes that I told them that I felt like I was being harassed and asked them to not talk to me anymore. And so I'm just like, cool, put it in your notes. Label me combative. I don't really care. You're not going to walk all over me.
God forbid I'm protecting my child from all of the things that you're trying to do. So they put in a call to DCYF. I'm assuming someone comes out to visit you at the hospital.
Yeah. When the registration guy called me in the room, he said, whatever the guy's name was, he said he's with He's with DCYF. He wants to come talk to you. At the time, I didn't realize that it was called DCYF because I'm not originally from Washington. And then I'm just like, yeah, just let him up. Let him come talk to me, whatever. I look back at it and I tell you, I swear, I think he was telling me that guy was there to come talk to me to try to get me to tell him to go away. I really think he was, because I think he knew more than me. Yeah. And I wish I could go back and tell that guy, I wish I would have done it because, and then so we only had contact with this guy once. I never saw him again after this initial visit, but he just basically came, asked for our side of everything that was going on. And then I remember the nurse that we had that day. I love her. I don't remember her name, but she was awesome. She was seriously like one of the best nurses that we had throughout that entire stay. And we were there for 2.5, almost 3 weeks. While that guy was in there talking to me and my mother-in-law, I think he was just sitting in like one of these like wooden chairs. Me and my mother-in-law were sitting next to each other on the couch. Nathaniel, he started having some kind of like event. His stats were dropping. So the guy like picked up his chair and he put it away. He walked to the other side of the room and everybody else came in. And I remember that nurse, like she said really loudly, she said, "This is a very healthy baby. This baby is so healthy." And then I'm just like, thank you. And later on, she told us, like, we're not allowed to talk to the CPS workers and we're not allowed to talk to the scan team doctors. And I'm just like, you're not allowed to talk to physicians in your own hospital. Like, are you kidding me? That was actually before I had told them to stop coming back. So yeah, he wound up finishing up, closing up his notes and then leaving. I never saw him again. That was the only time I ever saw that guy. Like, we get all of the abuse workup or whatever done that they wanted me to do with him. And then like they told us that they were going to test him for osteogenesis imperfecta. That was the only thing they tested him for.
And they probably only did the 2 genes, right? They didn't do
yeah. Well, it's not even so much that I'm like even worried about anymore. Like I kind of do think that he does have EDS just from some other stuff that he has going on.
Even grown adults, like without any type of brittle bones, have had rib fractures happen from CPR.
That's what I said.
Like on one hand, it's like that should have been the first bell that went off for them. But yeah, like a lot of these kids and moms with EDS or HEDS, they go like their whole life without really knowing they have it until it comes out in their kid. I don't know if you listen to the episode with Tasha. She's like, I just thought I was clumsy or accident prone or whatever like that. Yeah. Because she's like, I've always get broken bones my whole life. Before more recent generations, like, you don't really think about stuff like that. And a lot of these diseases are just becoming more known as genetic research gets done. A lot of the HEDS, I guess the version that a lot of people end up having that have a lot to do with the bone fragility. There's no DNA test for that yet because they don't know the exact mutation that causes it. They're still looking for it. It's interesting that so many people have gone like their whole life without even knowing they have it. But it's all like the same symptoms. And as soon as you said swelling, I'm like, my first thought was, could that be swelling because it was near where his throat was cut during the intubation? But yeah, if it's an EDS thing, there's swelling issues. There's all kinds of things that are not necessarily related to the same thing that happen in a lot of these families. So have you ever been tested or your husband for EDS?
No, I haven't. I have like over the last few months is when I've been really doing a lot of this research. And I actually remember I used to have a lot of really bad issues in one of my knees where it would throw out just randomly while I was at work. And like, I just like thought that was just because I was on my feet all the time. And I thought it was just something that I just had to deal with because of the line of work I chose. And I'm just like going along with my merry way, just dealing with it, wearing a knee brace all the time. And then I got carpal tunnel in both of my wrists. I was having to wear wrist braces all the time. And then so like, I'm looking back at what I had to deal with. And then I have a cousin who has similar issues to me. I have another relative with similar issues. And I'm just like, you know what? Like, maybe it is me.
That's like Tasha. She's walking around with like a brace on her knee. Both of her wrists are in braces and like not knowing that this is all related to the same thing her kid's going through.
Right.
And, if it weren't for these child abuse pediatricians, maybe nobody would know they have EDS, but maybe they would go on in their life and be okay because their kids aren't being taken away. So
very true. So a few days after that, we wound up getting transferred to the general floor. They had to make sure that Nathaniel could breathe on his own. So they had to like extubate him, make sure he did fine with that. And then they had to wean him off of the oxygen cannula because they said that he couldn't be on oxygen on the general floor. So somebody had said that we were probably going to wind up sharing a room with somebody. And then so I was totally expecting to get down there and then there'd be another kid in our room, and there wasn't. And then I was like, oh yeah, like somebody told us we were going to be sharing a room, and they were like, oh no, your son was diagnosed with RSV. You don't have to worry about that. And I'm just like, oh, perfect.
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with anybody else anyway.
Well, RSV sure explains why he was having so much trouble with that cold.
When we got down to the general floor, he was pretty fussy, like the fussiest that he had been since being extubated, really. And I was having a really hard time calming him down. And I remember having a really hard time. And then like, I remember the way that the nurse was like looking at me and like talking to me. It made me feel like I'm just like, you think I hurt my baby. You saw the paperwork and you think I hurt my baby. And then so like she sees me freaking out and she like, I can just feel the way she's looking at me is just like full of judgment. And I'm just like, my baby is sick. He's fussy. I'm stressed out. And like, of course I'm going to be having a hard time. I remember my husband was trying to calm me down. So he was just like, I'll take him. You go get a coffee or something. Cause there was a Starbucks in the hospital. So I went and I grabbed him and I both a drink and then just like wound up walking around for a little bit and then came back. Before we got transferred to the general floor, we did make contact with another social worker or another caseworker, and she had me go for a drug test. Yeah, little did I know at the time that I didn't have to go do that because it wasn't court ordered. While I was sitting there waiting to go in to get my drug test done, I'm Googling it. I'm like, do I have to take a drug test if it's not court ordered? Can CPS make me go take a drug test? And everything I found was just like, no, you don't have to do anything without a court order. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? And then so like, I literally called her and I'm just like, hey, I was just wondering, was this drug test court ordered? And she said, no, we just like to have the parents do it just in case. In my head, I'm just like, just in case. What?
Right.
So I'm just like, okay, whatever. I'm already here, so I'm just going to go ahead and go do it. I pee in the cup for him, and then I go back, and then my husband, he goes and does it. And then while he's gone, our son has his first seizure. I'm sitting there in the hospital holding him while he has his first seizure. And I just remember him convulsing and the way that his back arched. And I remember the rhythmic movements that he was using in his hands. And I'll never forget that, having to sit in the hospital while I was by myself because they made my husband go take a drug test. I remember calling him and telling him what happened, and he like hurried back. He wound up not being able to even go because he just pee shy. So he wound up not even being able to do the drug test for them. So he wound up coming back and he was mad. He was actually mad at that point that he was not there with me when that happened and that I had to do that by myself. And he told them, no, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to go try to do that drug test because I'm not leaving my wife in the hospital by herself and it's not court ordered. So he wound up never going back to get another drug test. And then, so after we got sent to the general floor, we wound up having a shelter hearing, which is, so
when they decide if they're going to remove the kids or not.
Yeah. Well, at this point, they had already sent the supervisor out there to the hospital to talk to us. They decided in the shelter care hearing that he didn't have to take a drug test because it did get brought up.
Like, there's no reason to think that drugs are involved. So you don't just like.
Yeah, that's literally what they said in court. That's what the lawyer said was, is there any reason to believe that drugs played a part in this? And the caseworker was like, no. And he said, okay, well then no, he doesn't have to do a drug test. It was stupid. I was like, thank God at least one person's using somewhat little bit of logic here. But before that, when the supervisor came to the hospital, she walked in and she was just like, hey, sorry to show up on such short notice. And he was like, oh yeah, no, it's okay. How long did it take you to get here? And then she said 2.5 hours. And he said, oh, so you mean you had plenty of time to let us know? And she said, oh yeah, well, we just don't like to let the parents know we're coming. And then he was like, well, why couldn't you have said that in the first place? She had at that point in time already decided that she didn't like him because he challenged her. I think that kind of was like, I feel like at that point she almost made it personal the way that she came after us with that. She separated us both to talk to us about what happened.
And this is before the shelter hearing or after?
Before. This was what led to the shelter care hearing. She separately asked us both to sign a VPA. We both said no, that we wanted to talk to a lawyer first.
Good.
She said, okay, yeah, that's fine. You can go. Like, she waited for us to try to contact a lawyer. We thought we had one that was like actually gonna do some good for us. And I really got my hopes up, and he did not. Neither did the one that I was assigned by the state, because we unfortunately at the time did not have the funds to try to fight that. She didn't know that at the time, which I think was beneficial for us, because we didn't tell her that we were getting a state lawyer. We were just like, yeah, we need to call our lawyer. And because we had already had the name of one, but we didn't realize that he was a state appointed attorney. But so she told us that because we weren't signing the VPA, that they were going to file for emergency custody or whatever the term was that she used.
Yeah.
And then so they had an emergency shelter care hearing. So no, they did that on a Friday. We wound up having the hearing on Monday. So on Friday, they got emergency. I don't remember what the word is that they used, how they described it. Basically, the state had the ability to just like, for an emergency, because they thought there was an immediate threat, take our kid from us. Just like basically like emergency protection order for our kid. And
even though he was in the hospital.
Yes.
Under the care of doctors with lots of people around. Okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
They've left us in the hospital unsupervised with him this whole entire time. They gave us a 2-hour warning that we had to be out of the hospital on a Friday evening. So that way they knew that we had no time to fight it. So I remember standing there in that hospital room, just literally bawling my eyes out. The social worker for the hospital came and told us that we had to leave, but the nurse was in there when she came in, and I just like literally just got hysterical. I lost it. And the nurse like hugged me, and I was just like falling into her, just weeping and sobbing. And I was just like, I don't understand how they could do this. I don't understand how this is legal that they can even do this. The social worker that was there, she actually let us stay a little bit longer than we were supposed to, because we were waiting on my mother-in-law to show up.
Right. So they were going to let her stay at the hospital with him, right?
Yeah. But the thing about that is they weren't letting us know that until she asked. They waited for her to ask, hey, can I go stay with him since y'all are kicking them out? They didn't even like tell us that was an option or anything. Like, they really were trying so hard from the very beginning to be so sneaky about everything.
You're trying to look out for the best interest of your child. And if they think they're looking out for the best interest of your child by taking him away from you, then look out for the best interest of my child. And him being in a hospital by himself is not it. You would think that they would have been like, can you get family here or something like that? So she shows up. Okay.
Yeah. So when she got there, we sat there and we talked to the social worker that was there for a few minutes. And then like we were trying to ask her questions, but because she was like an actual hospital social worker, she didn't really have like a ton of answers for us. She was just like, yeah, I don't really know. This is just like what I'm being told. And so like I wasn't angry with her, because I think honestly at the time, I think most of the people that met with us kind of saw it for what it was and realized what was going on, because there were so many people, there were so many nurses that we had that told us that it did not make sense. There were at least 3 nurses that I had that told me they've seen abused babies come in and out of this hospital all the time, and they know that baby was not abused. So they allow us to come back to the hospital. The judge that we had determined that, or he decided that because there was hospital staff there and there were monitors and like almost always somebody coming in and out of the room, that there was no need for us to have even left the hospital. You could have said that 4 days ago.
All right. So you're able to move back into the hospital with the baby while he's there. But does the judge continue with oversight of the department? Did they open a case?
They determined that our son was dependent upon the state. And so they took custody of him because they were concerned about the rib fractures. So I just recently listened to both Tasha and Melissa's story. And I remember one of them saying that it felt like they took whatever the child abuse pediatrician said and just ran with it. Yeah. That was the investigation, case closed. Like, they weren't doing any further investigating. They just saw MD and they just went with it. And I feel like, honestly, I feel like that's exactly what happened. They saw that the child abuse pediatrician said that he thought that it was abuse, that it was likely non-accidental trauma, And they just said, oh, yep, it's abuse. We're not going to investigate any further. That's it. That's all we need. And so, yeah, they opened the case. 3 more days, we got discharged because we had the case open. They wouldn't let us take him from the hospital. My mother-in-law had to come up there and they discharged him to my mother-in-law, where he would actually be spending the next 101 nights. Based on some of the other families that are going through this, I do consider our situation to be a little less severe, because I know that there are definitely parents that are in this that have been in this for years.
Yeah.
And our case lasted just almost a year, not quite a year. It was dismissed in August of 22. Yeah, it was dismissed in August of 22. It opened in October of 21. So it was almost a year. It was too much shy of a year. Yeah, he stayed with my mother-in-law for 101 nights. We began with strictly supervised visitation. I remember our attorneys saying that this was kind of unheard of. The judge gave us extremely liberal supervised visitation, where we could show up at the crack of dawn and leave at bedtime. It had to be supervised. We could not leave with Nathaniel. He had to stay at my mother-in-law's. If she was to take him somewhere, we could go with her. She had to be there with us at all times. 1 or 2 months into it, they gave us the unsupervised time back, very liberal from the beginning of the day. As long as we brought him back by bedtime, there would be no issues.
It almost makes you think that the judge knew that this was not a true allegation.
Yeah, I wondered that myself, honestly.
Because I can't imagine a judge giving that much freedom if he really thought somebody hurt this little tiny baby. You know what I mean?
Right.
But that almost makes it more frustrating, because it's like, dude, if you can tell and you just know what the truth is, why are we even doing this? But I'm thankful for that for you, because that is such an important time in a human's life to be with their parents. While you may not have lost your kid for years and years and you didn't permanently lose your kid, the most traumatic moment in my entire life was a situation where I had a foster kiddo whose mom was mad at the department because she wasn't getting visits. And that was an early enough case that I don't really know if it was a department's fault or her fault, because she was they're not calling me, and they were she's not calling me. So I don't know whose fault it was. I know it wasn't mine. I was always right. Hey, come get this kid, whatever you want, do the visits. He needs to see his mom. But because she was mad at them, she called the abuse hotline and said that somebody sliced her son's body open. And so I came home with my kids, picking them up from school one day, and there were no less than 10 sheriff's cars in my front yard with their lights on. I'm a foster mom. My kids are they've all been through traumatic experiences where the police remove them from their home. And anytime they see the police, they get nervous and they're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? My kids didn't deserve to spend the next 4 hours getting interrogated. All of this to say, the most traumatic moment of my life was the 4 hours that the police were investigating me and my children. My kids were all traumatized for a really long time after that. I still, sometimes when I see sheriff's cars near my house, just driving down the road, my heart starts racing. Now I'm hearing all these stories of people not doing anything and they lose their kids anyway. So I'm freaking terrified. All I'm trying to say is you're well, my kid was only gone for 100 days. So I know it could have been worse. Well, listen, my kids never left. It was 1 4-hour event, but it deeply affected me and traumatized me. And it was a while before I felt normal again. It is a really big deal. For you to have experienced that, it all sucks. For you to be without your kid for one night sucks. I'm glad that you were able to get good access to him. And I'm glad that he was able to come home relatively, not as quick as he should have, but that's not to say that that's not a huge, horrible, horrendous thing that happened to you and to your son and your husband.
Yes. Yes, very much. Melissa talked about carrying the burden of that because her kids were really little. And I really I deeply, deeply related to that because Nathaniel was a baby and he was only a year old when the case was dismissed. So I know that he won't remember any of it, which is, it's nice that he won't remember any of it because I don't want him to have to carry that with him. But I just wish that it never would have happened because I have to deal with the anxiety, the PTSD from that. And my husband, Landon, he has to carry the anxiety, the PTSD from that. And so it's just, even though our son won't remember it, I deeply believe that your body stores trauma. And
yeah, 100%.
it definitely has affected me as a parent, affected me as a person. It probably will continue to affect me for the rest of my life. Yes.
I'm sure it will. And it also changes your whole perspective on everything in the world, because you and every single other one of these moms have said the same thing to me. When this first happened, I know they're just trying to do their job. I'm not worried about it because I didn't do anything to my kid. I'm just trying to cooperate and be able to take care of my kid. And I'm thinking, as long as I'm just honest and tell them what happened, then we're all good. And then when you go through something like this and you realize that just because you didn't do something doesn't mean that you're not going to be punished for doing something you didn't do, then that's a scary place to be in your head. So I think the after effects, the psychological damage that these false allegations cause are just, you can't even put a value on that. Like, you can't even quantify the damage that this does to people.
It was 3.5 months
of living with your mother-in-law before Nathaniel came home to you. What was it, other than it seems like the judge knew from the get-go that y'all didn't abuse Nathaniel? What was it that convinced him to send Nathaniel home?
Purely for the fact that there had been no new incidents. I think we had 3 or 4 case reviews, because, they do them every 30-ish days or so or whatever. And we had a couple of visits with the caseworker. When he was asked if there were any reasons to not let him come home, he told him that there was no reason, that he thought that it would be beneficial for him to be placed back in home. And then so he did. He came back home after that. Things kind of started to go back to normal a little bit, because so they let Nathaniel come home on the conditions that my mother-in-law would see him every day. So she had to lay eyes on him every day, whether that be me going to her house or her coming to mine. The gal had to see him once a week. The caseworker had to see him once a week. And then he had to have a well check with a pediatrician once a month.
I have never heard of getting so much visits and then getting overnights and reunifications so quick. It takes a lot longer down here for that kind of thing to happen. To me, that's just kind of further proof that they knew that you didn't do anything. You know what I mean?
In the very beginning, when I kind of realized everything, what all was going on and what exactly was playing out, I started getting kind of hyper vigilant and paying attention to the way that they were wording things and what they were doing. And every single time there were new case notes, I made a request to my lawyer that I wanted all of the discovery. I want every bit of it. So I was on top of it. I was I want all of this information. Every single time you have it, please send it to me. I'd go through the case notes all the time, just trying to see what exactly it was that they were saying about us. So in the beginning, when my son was still in the hospital, my sister-in-law had set up a GoFundMe for us because I was out of work and we were 2.5 hours away from where we live. So we needed a little bit of help to deal with all of the financial aspects of everything.
Yeah.
And I'm very forever grateful for every single person that supported us in that way. They had it in the case notes. The lady was watching my Facebook account and put it in her case notes that I had a GoFundMe on my profile.
What the freak does that have to do with the case?
That's what I wanted to know. I literally asked my lawyer, I'm just what do they care about? Why is there a GoFundMe on my page?
The seizure that your son had in the hospital, did you ever find out what that was related to?
They told me it was related to the cardiac arrest. So I guess in a roundabout way, it kind of was caused by the injury that he sustained from the intubation, because had he not had that injury, I don't think anything else would have transpired from that. But yeah, they told me in the hospital that it was very common with people who have suffered cardiac arrest to have seizure activity afterwards.
Has he had more seizures?
So he had a series of 3 seizures in the hospital before they got him on an anticonvulsant. While he was in the care of my mother-in-law, actually just a few days after he came home was when he had his last dose of the medication. While he was at my mother-in-law's, she was having to give him that every day. We went to a follow-up neurologist visit, and she said that the dose he was on for his weight was no longer even a therapeutic dosage. So if he was going to have any more seizures, he would have already had them. So she did wind up taking him off of it. But there was a time, 18 or 19 months old, I was pregnant with our daughter. And he had like some kind of cold. I don't know what. I don't think he ever wound up getting tested for it, but he did wind up getting some kind of viral sickness and was running a fever. And then his fever spiked super fast and he wound up having a febrile seizure. After that, he hasn't had any more since then. So they did tell me that they told me that usually I think by age 3 is when they grow out of it, or age 4 or something. But typically they peak around 18 months and he was right around that age. And so since he had already had a history of seizures, it made sense that he had that last one that he had.
And I'm not even saying that this is something you're interested in, but just because it spiraled so badly, I would probably be curious. Is there any accountability, retribution for what was done to him in the hospital? Like, I mean, I hate to say it, like, but is it something you could sue the hospital for, or at least get a lawyer to write a letter and say, you know, we believe that these injuries were caused by the hospital? And I don't know.
So it's tricky because he did not sustain any like lifelong injuries. And because there's no way to prove that anything that he may struggle with was caused by that because he was a baby. Mm-hmm. So I've had a hard time finding anybody that's really interested in taking the case on. However, I did speak with a lawyer here recently within the last few months that he was pretty interested in what happened. He definitely sees that the hospital was at fault and also that the state was at fault. But because he doesn't have a formal EDS diagnosis, he told me that if there was a way that I could have him formally diagnosed with ADHD and they could actually link that to the oxygen deprivation that he had in the helicopter, then I would absolutely have a case. But he said without either of those things, that like there's not really a way that he could actually present it to a jury and prove that it was the hospital's fault. I have found out that my birth was actually considered very traumatic because it was not a normal birth. I pushed for more than 4 hours and it ended in a C-section. So I found that out and I'm like, oh, and he was sunny side up. So I found all that out and I'm just like, literally the medical definition of a traumatic birth. So because I pushed for so long, that right there absolutely could have caused his fractures. I don't know because I'm not an expert. I think that there are multiple possibilities. It's just a matter of if I wanted to go the route of finding another expert to like dig all of that up and look at it again. Yeah. And I know that costs a lot of money and I don't even know if I'm going to be able to do anything at this point. So it's just like, I don't,
it's interesting to me how well you handled this, because I think most people in this situation don't think to do a lot of the things you did. And honestly, aside from the fact that it does seem like the judge and most people could tell that y'all hadn't actually abused your child, you did a lot of things that a lot of people don't think to do that probably ended up helping you, like not signing the voluntary protection order, right? A lot of people just think, oh, if I do this, they won't remove my kids, so I'll do that. And then that locks them in. And I've learned a lot from talking to all of you families about what to do if I was ever in this situation that I never would have thought to do, because I'm like, why do you have to do that? And the minute you start jumping through their hoops, you're stuck already. What would you recommend to another family who's going through this? Like, what are the important things that you think really helped you?
If you're in the very beginning and like you're just getting into it and you don't know what to do, the biggest piece of advice I can give to anybody is don't talk to anybody. Don't say anything. Don't say anything at all. Tell them you're going to talk to your lawyer and then you'll get back to them, or you'll have your lawyer contact them. Like, don't agree to anything. Nothing. Don't sign anything. Nothing. Do all communication through a lawyer, every single bit of it. Because if you don't, they will find some way to take what you said and twist it to mean something that you did not mean at all. But if it's for people that aren't in it and they want to support, I would say the biggest thing is just like helping to raise awareness to the issue. Like anytime that you see anybody talking about it, like if it's on social media, like share the post, send it to somebody that you don't know if totally is aware of the situation. Especially with like the current other people in Georgia that are going through it, you could always message the Georgia state representation, tell them to get their people in check, or whatever state it is that you reside in. If you know somebody that's going through it, message the representation, tell them what's going on, tell them your opinions on it, how you feel about it, how it's affecting your community, what they can do differently.
Like, we should all have the second opinion law in all 50 states, not
Yes,
just two or
absolutely.
three.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe and follow us on social. We hope that you join us again next time and keep on fostering the future.